Hello viewer, a warm welcome to Elimu TV where you watch and learn. Welcome to the 7th lesson of Biology Form 3. Today we're going to talk about Spermatophyta. We're still on the same topic, Kingdom Plantae. I am your teacher, Madam Monocots. So this is what we're going to discuss today, or rather learn today in this lesson. So first, we're going to look at the previous assignment. Then we're going to define Spermatophyta. We're going to look at the examples of organisms which are found in Spermatophyta. We're going to look at the general characteristics of Spermatophyta. We're also going to look at the importance of Spermatophyta. And lastly, an assignment. So let us start by looking at the previous assignment. Question number 1 was, ferns are autotrophs, explain why. So when you just hear of the word auto, it means it is self, or it can make things with its own self. So the first thing, the ferns, they have the chlorophyll, that is the green matter in them, the pigment, so they can be able to make their own food. That's why they are called autotrophs. Autotrophs are organisms who are, or they are in position to make their own food, and they do not depend on any other organism. The second question, what is the difference in the structure of the root between a fern and a moss? So a moss has false roots, which we call them the rhizoids, whereas the ferns have well-defined roots. Part B, in what division do the above plants belong? So the moss belongs to the division we call Bryophyta, whereas the fern belongs to a division in Kingdom Plantae we call Pteridophyta. So let us look at Spermatophyta. So they are seed-bearing plants. They have a vascular tissue which is present in them. That is a well-defined xylem and a phloem tissue. Xylem responsible for the transport of water and mineral salts, whereas phloem is responsible for the transport of organic material. All of these are present in the organisms which are found under the division Spermatophyta. Then, still, the organisms of the same division, they have well-developed roots, stems, and also the leaf. Then the reproduction is both either by sexual reproduction or by asexual reproduction. So the Spermatophyta is divided into two main subdivisions. So the first division, we have the Angiospermatophyta, and the second division is called the Gymnospermatophyta. So we're going to look at this subdivision, each of them, their characteristics and example of each of these subdivisions. So we first start looking by Angiospermatophyta. So the term angiosperm, it is derived from a Latin word which means, the Latin word angi, which means enclosed. So angi means enclosed. Then sperma is derived from a Greek word which means the seed. Remember, Latin and Greek are the universally known languages for sciences. So most of these words that we learn today, they have a root in either Latin or in Greek. So the angiosperms, by defining them, we've said angi means enclosed, then the sperma is the seed. So angiosperms are those plants whose seeds developed in an enclosed structure. So the keyword here is the seed and enclosed. So these are plants that the seeds develop in an enclosed structure. So all angiosperms, they have flowers at some stage in their lives. So for example, they have the flowers are divided into two parts. We have the carpel and we have the stamen. The carpel is the female part of the flower. They are enclosed developing seeds that may turn into a fruit. So the carpel consists of the stigma, the style, the ovary, and in them you'll find the ovules. Then the stamel is the male part of the flower. So it comprises of the anthers and the filaments only, as it has been illustrated in the illustration below. So the stamens are the reproductive structure which are found in the flowers that produce the pollen grains that carry the male genetic information. So they do this with the help of pollination. So we're going to introduce a video that is going to help us to understand more about the reproduction of the flowering plants.
Our topic for today is sexual reproduction in flowering plants. Let us learn about the male and female reproductive parts of flowers. Carpel is the female reproductive part of the flower. Top part of the carpel is called the stigma. Stigma is supported by the style. Base part of the carpel is the ovary. Ovary contains one or more ovules. Each ovule has a female gamete. Flowers that contain both male and female reproductive parts are called bisexual flowers. Hibiscus and rose are some examples of bisexual flowers. Flowers that contain either male or female reproductive parts are called unisexual flowers. Papaya and watermelon are some examples of unisexual flowers. For fertilization to take place, pollen grains need to be transferred from the stamen to the stigma. If the transfer of pollen grains takes place in the same flower, then it is called self-pollination. If the transfer of pollen grains takes place from one flower to another, then it is called cross-pollination. This transfer of pollen grains is done by wind, water, insects, or animals. After the pollen grain lands on the stigma, the tube cell produces a pollen tube through the style into the ovule. The male gametes travel along with the tube nucleus through the pollen tube. After they reach the ovule, one of the male gametes fuses with the female gamete, leading to fertilization. Fertilization leads to the formation of zygote. The other male gamete fuses with the polar nuclei to eventually form endosperm. The zygote divides multiple times to form an embryo within the ovule. The endosperm provides nourishment to the embryo. Eventually, the ovule develops and turns into a seed.
Yes!
So proceeding on, still looking at the Angiospermatophyta, they have very small pollen grains that spread their genetic information from the flowers to the flowers. So they are also comprised of the xylem, which contain the tracheids, and the phloem vessel that contain the companion cells and both the sieve cell. So this one, so we say that the xylem and the phloem are present in both of them. So that is an example of the pollen grains which are found in an organism in the angiosperm. Still, looking at the Angiospermatophyta division, it is still subdivided into two groups. The first one being the dicotyledons and the second one being the monocotyledon. From the prefixes di and mono, di means it is made of two cotyledons, and the mono, it means one. So it is just made up of one cotyledon. So let us look at some of the differences between the monocotyledons and the dicotyledons. So as we have said, mono means one, so it is comprised of one cotyledon. That is in monocots. In dicots, it is comprised of the two cotyledons. When you look at the arrangement in the floral parts, in monocots, it comes in parts of threes. Like you can see the flower parts there, they come in terms of 3. Whereas in dicots, the floral parts, that is the flower, they come in pairs of 4s or in 5s. When you look at the veins, the venation, in monocots, they are parallel veins. That means the veins run from one direction, either from up to down or down to up, which is different from the dicot. The dicot, the venation is a net-like venation. So it means it's like just like a net. So the leaves are arranged in a net-like structure. When you look at it at the monocots in terms of the pollen grains, they have one pore, whereas in the dicots they have 3 pores. Then when you look at it in terms of the vascular bundles, how they are arranged, that is, we're talking about the xylem and the phloem. So the vascular bundles are located throughout the stems. There is no particular structure where they are located. They are just throughout the structure. Whereas the dicots, the vascular bundles are arranged in ring-like structure. You can look at the picture here. You can see the vessels are arranged in a ring-like structure, whereas in monocotyledons, they are just everywhere. So these are the general differences between the dicots and the monocots. We have said that the seeds of dicots are made of 2 cotyledons, whereas in monocots, they are made of 1. In dicots, the leaves are very broad and they have network venation, whereas in monocots, the leaves are very narrow and they are made up of parallel veins. When you look at the vascular bundles arrangement, they are arranged in a ring-like structure, that is in a dicot. Whereas in monocot, the vascular bundles, that is both the xylem and the phloem, are scattered everywhere within. Then in dicots, they have a pith at the center of the stem. The pith is the innermost part of the stem, that is the internal structure. Whereas in the monocots, they do not have any pith. Looking at the dicots, they have a cambium in between the vascular bundles, so that's why it is involved in the secondary growth. So you can identify a dicot using the rings, so it can help you to know how many years the plant is. Like when you cut a tree, you can see the vascular bundles, the cambium, which is arranged in terms of the rings. That one can help to tell you how many years the plant is. Whereas in monocotyledon, there is no cambium, so there is no secondary growth. So examples of the cotyledon that we normally know are like the beans. If you look at a bean and you cut it into 2, you can be able to identify the 2 cotyledons we are talking about. Same to the peas, the mangoes, and jacaranda. Then in monocotyledon, examples that we know, like for example, a maize, it is just made up of 1 cotyledon. If you cut it into 2, it cannot produce the same cotyledons like the ones in the beans. Then another example still on monocotyledon, we have the wheat, the banana, the sisal, and the coconut. So we're still looking at the characteristic of Gymnospermatophyta. Another characteristics, they do not have an outer covering or a shell around their seeds. They also do not produce any flowers or any fruits. They are mostly pollinated by the winds. It means that the winds are the ones which pollinate or transfer the pollen grains. Then they have no element vessel, that is the xylem. They have the tracheids only. While the phloem, they have the sieve cells, but they lack the companion cell. We know that our phloem tissue is made up of both of them, the sieve elements and the companion cell. So in this case, the Gymnospermatophyta, the phloem is only made of the sieve cell, so they lack the companion cells. So these are examples of organisms which are found under Gymnospermatophyta. So we have the conifers, we have the cycads, we have the ginkgos, and we have the genotophytes. So these are examples of the organisms which are found there. So still looking at more examples of Gymnospermatophyta, we have the pine. So that is example of a pine tree. Then we have the cedar. That is the example of a cedar. Then we have the cypress tree. And lastly, we have the cynads. So those are the examples. So we have talked about the Angiospermatophyta and the Gymnospermatophyta. All these are subdivision of the big division we call the Spermatophyta. So let us look at a brief outline of the plant kingdom. So the plants are either made of two. It's either a vascular or non-vascular. When you mean by vascular, we say that it is made up of the structure xylem and phloem. Those are the vascular tissues which are responsible for the transport. So under the vascular plants, we have the ones that produce the seeds, and we have the ones that do not produce any seed. So under the ones that produce the seed, we have the angiosperms and gymnosperms, the ones we have just discussed about now. Then still under the vascular plants, you say there are others which cannot produce any seeds. So we have like the ferns and the related plants. Then at the other part, we have the non-vascular. This one means that they do not have any structures that help them in the transport of either the mineral salts, the water, or the organic material. So that one is example, we have the mosses and the likes of other species within the same division. So up to now, we have been looking at the kingdoms. We first started by looking at kingdom Monera that comprises of bacteria. We talked about their characteristics and their benefits to us as in terms of the economic benefit. We've talked about Protista. Examples, we have the green algae, the red algae, their benefits and their characteristics. We've also been talking about the fungi, that is the mushroom, the yeast, the molds, the economic importance and such kind of things. Then under the Plantae kingdom, we have been looking at Bryophyta, Pteridophyta, and today we've been looking at Spermatophyta. So next we're going to look at kingdom Animalia, which is very broad. We're going to look at all the subdivisions that are found under the kingdom of Animalia. So that has been our lesson for today.